problems was eSIM IoT and SGP32? What was this actually trying to solve?
Fundamentally, it's addressing vendor lock-in, which I think is one of the biggest barriers that we have within specifically the telecom industry. eSIM IoT has flipped that around, saying, okay, we don't put the burden and the investment necessarily onto a limited amount of operators, but we put the investment into it from a customer perspective. So again, if you want to make this investment as an individual customer, you can do so. The industry-wide accepted freedom to leave clause that we're seeing, or technology that we're seeing being implemented here.
And is that a guarantee that with
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Unfortunately, no, it's not a guarantee. And I think, unfortunately, that's also, is as I mentioned, the disease of telecom as a whole. Stats from GSMA has shown that 5 out of 8 current as of today eSIM IoT vendors, unfortunately, has chosen to not provide the freedom to change things down the road, which means more than half is already implemented wrongly and not to the promise of eSIM IoT.
What's that one question they should be asking to make sure that they're on the right side of this?
Are your eSIM IoT solution GSMA certified, and do you fulfill the promise of no vendor login in any piece of the chain? And I think we really sort of need to unfuck telecom, and I think we have an opportunity to do so with the standard.
I don't know if I'm going to say it's an emergency broadcast, but let them know that.
Missing the siren thing.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week. I forgot to go get that one.
You had one job.
I know. I have one job. It's to get the siren. My name's Connor. I'm here today with Henrik, our CTO and co-founder at Onomondo. And you probably heard a lot about eSIM IoT. Heard a lot about eSIM IoT, SGP32, eIMs. There's a whole lot of really, really important topics that we're really, really excited about, but there's also a lot of what we could call noise and promises and things that we feel is really, really important to make sure everyone has a full understanding of what's so exciting about this technology and the potentials of this technology, and also making sure that everyone has a clear picture of what we can expect in the years to come as this becomes more developed. So that's why I wanted to bring Henrik into the room today to ask him a couple questions around what eSIM IoT actually is. And hopefully by the end of this, everyone has a much better picture of what to expect from this technology and what questions they should be asking in the years to come. So thanks, Henrik, for sitting in this room with me today.
Well, thank you.
Let's start with something simple. What are we actually talking about today? When we're talking about eSIM IoT, what does that actually mean?
That's a very good question, I would say. For us, eSIM IoT is an ecosystem, I think. And I think that's the very first thing to be very aware of. It's an ecosystem that our industry has bought into, which is really nice. It's standardized, it's approved by GSMA, written by GSMA as well. Technical specifications and how it should work out, everything has sort of been accepted by the industry. And I think first and foremost that's very important, and it's an ecosystem that plays both into, you can say, the operators, the connectivity providers, as well as the SIM vendors and the customers. So it's everything coming together as sort of a unified ecosystem that can play very well together if implemented correctly.
And why should people care about that being implemented correctly? Like, why should people care about this new ecosystem that's relatively new in the last couple of years?
I think as with a lot of hype in this industry, I think sort of a lot of it is driven by new technology. I think in the many past years, we've seen innovation happening from the vendors within the industry itself rather than maybe market demands. I think eSIM IoT is a very good example of market demands, customer demand on what they needed and where we as an industry have listened. And I think when I mentioned also implemented correctly, I think this can actually be one of the things really unlocking a lot of new stuff for the industry, which will accelerate and adopt IoT deployments. So it's a benefit for everyone in the ecosystem.
Okay. So it's really about how people can deploy more, accelerating deployments. And I guess like going deeper into it, like what's the background of like what problems was eSIM IoT and SGP32? What was this actually trying to solve?
Fundamentally, it's addressing vendor lock-in, which I think is one of the biggest barriers that we have within specifically the telecom industry.
Can you just define vendor lock-in for maybe people that aren't familiar with the term?
I think it goes all the way back all to sort of the consumers and the mobile phones and all of that. Like in the very early days, when you bought a phone, it would actually be tied to a specific operator, and for you to change that, you would actually need to change the phone. For the consumer version, and where you have a human being at the other end, sort of the SIM card came about to partially unlock that and make it easier for you to swap by swapping the SIM cards, which I think pretty much everyone have tried to do so. And I think lately, on the consumer side as well, we've had eSIM, the consumer version of eSIM, which you know from the Apple Watch or the Android phones and such, where you can much easier, without physically swapping something, you can change your connectivity provider, and you can say what would, before that, you would have a vendor log into that specific operator. That has changed. IoT is completely different, because we do have physical assets out in the real world, where in many cases the business case doesn't fulfill that you would need to attend to that as a human being. And so IoT has been prohibited by that choices you made very early in the design phase and the build phase of the devices and the hardware used for the IoT project. You would make decisions on the vendors that you would work with for the lifetime of that unit. On that relationship, eSIM IoT can solve that, and for many cases, it might not unlock as such new use cases, but it might make the decisions for actually venturing into doing IoT and digitization of the industry that you're in much easier, because you know you have the flexibility to change that down the road. And then referring to vendor login is removing that. Suddenly you have the flexibility to change your choices whenever it makes sense. And that might be in the early testing phase, development phase, manufacturing phase, deployment phase, post-deployment phase, that you have that freedom to at whatever point in time, you can change the choices you've made. Because again, the world changes as we know. So the decision you make today, 3 years from now, that choice might need to be changed.
One of the things that we've seen a lot about is when it comes to some of the actual use cases behind it, is we're talking about eSIM IoTs and SGP32 as being a way to actually create a better insurance for devices, or to help with roaming and just this general flexibility. Can you talk a little bit more about, like, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the customer, for the people that are actually deploying devices? We say no more vendor lock-in and we say this flexibility, but practically what does that actually change in someone's day-to-day?
I think you can say the insurance model, which might be the sort of the easiest one to attack, is again the relationship and partnership you make with a connectivity provider when you're designing and building your product. You can change that afterwards, and that may be that you can say the commercial model doesn't fit in the long term. That might be 3 years from now, the commercial model has changed, or you want to have a different commercial relationship towards someone else, and then suddenly you can change that. So you're not tied into, you can say, that specific business that you've chosen to work with. That again might have very different strategic reasons for changing things down the line. For more on sort of the roaming landscape and such, it might be that you today find a vendor that fulfill all your needs. You might have a product that you only sell to Denmark, Germany, and the US, and then you find a connectivity provider that serves those needs. Then it might be again 3 years from now. Either it can be that the operator that you've chosen for some reason cannot serve that market anymore, or it might be that you want to expand into a new market. We have well-known countries such as Brazil and Turkey and others where there are different regulations kicking in, where you might need a specific direct relationship with a provider in that area. Before eSIM IoT, you can say, then you would need to manufacture your devices specifically for those markets. You can say putting that physical SIM with that specific operator into those devices for the deployment of that. And then I think everyone who's sort of been in the industry and done hardware knows sort of manufacturing, logistics, planning, how many devices to sell to this market versus that one. You're not able to take a portion and reschedule for another market. All of that can suddenly disappear, because now you are able to, again, change that within the specific hardware whenever it makes sense. So again, it's the flexibility that it provides. So again, your needs might change. You might need to expand your business, and or it might be that that the operator that you entertained with in the early days suddenly changed things so it doesn't fit you as a customer specifically. And eSIM IoT unlocks that.
Yeah, and it also sounds like through this kind of consolidation of this one SIM that can do so much and fit all these different use cases, there's also a certain amount of maybe simplicity that comes for the customer for it as well. The fact that it is just one platform and one SIM that's able to help them do all of this rather than have to switch to a new provider or a new vendor every time they have a big business decision.
Yes, and I think actually in that regard, it's very important to also think of eSIM IoT not necessarily as your connectivity. When you as a customer need to go out and embed this and look for this, one shouldn't treat it as connectivity. This should be part of the bill of material. It should be part of the design choices and in the build phase of the devices. It's something that you put onto your device. You want your device to support eSIM IoT. For you then can choose your connectivity operator whenever the need is there. And again, that might be one connectivity provider. It might be multiple, depending on very much, you can say, the scenario of your product and your business case. But eSIM IoT as a whole shouldn't be seen as a connectivity product. It should be seen as something that you put on your device. And it's part of that mental picture for you to, again, to have the choices and the flexibility when needs change.
Is this for every single use case?
Not necessary.
Okay.
I think it's for a big portion of the use cases. But eSIM IoT as a whole, both you can say having an EIM, purchasing eSIM IoT enabled SIMs, etc., comes with a cost. Both from, you can say, pure commercially, but it also put resource or it's power hungry and not as efficient as other solutions that we're seeing out there. So if we have use cases with very, very constrained devices, very short-lived devices, there can be many use cases. eSIM IoT might not be the right choice. So it very much depends on the use case, and if you can say the need for, at the end of the day, choosing between, you can say, connectivity providers and have that flexibility end to end. If that doesn't necessarily fit the use case, eSIM IoT might not be the right solution because it comes with a cost. And I think that's also for people to be aware of.
Really good points on that. And I think one thing that maybe is worth kind of doubling back on is, so we talk about this and we talk about all these benefits and all these potential use cases that can come from implementing this correctly, and that kind of flexibility and possibility that can come from when we do this correctly, of not thinking of it necessarily as connectivity, but eSIM IoT as an extra tool that makes IoT more possible. Why is there so much excitement around that? Because I can get what you're talking about, but it's blowing up in the news and in the industry. Everyone's talking about it every single day. Why do you think some of that excitement is there?
I think it's because IoT as a whole is becoming more and more mature. So I think there's also a lot more that has felt the pain from, you can say, not having eSIM IoT. Again, either businesses that has grown that then suddenly find the limitations of their current relationship that they have, and or again the world changing. So I think there's other excitement for this specific technology and this specific specification because it really and truly unlocks and touches upon some of the barriers and challenges that we've had in the industry. And I think that's why it's exciting. It's again back to it's driven by market demand. It's driven by a need. It hasn't been sort of innovation for the technology's sake, done for someone to suddenly sell more. It's been created because there was a specific need for it. And I think that's exciting. And I think that's what we're seeing the industry showing as well. That's the excitement.
Yeah. And that's I think a great segue to, I think, another point where it's around like, okay, new technology introduced back in 2022, 2023. What was actually new as part of this when we compare it to what had existed before with SGP.32 and SGP.32?
Yeah, so eSIM IoT and SGP32 is very much, you can say, sort of an evolution of the eSIM standard itself, or EUICC more technically. Where at first we haven't taken sort of a stab at it for IoT or in the early days called M2M, the eSIM M2M version, the SGP02 version. That was maybe not so much driven by market demand, or you can say at least when we look at market demand from a you can say the customer and the user's perspective, but maybe much more from within the industry itself. Us trying to stitch together, you can say, a lot of agreements into this single SIM, but driven from the operators and the ecosystem as such. It had a ton of complications on it, both commercially, agreement-wise, but also technically. A lot of implementation, a lot of investment from the industry as a whole, and I think when we have massive investments, that is also holding back in many cases the adoption and acceleration of that. I think also today it's not so much a standard that we're seeing anymore. I think mentally a lot of people have deprecated that one. I think a very successful one is, again, the consumer version, the one, again, we know from the Apple Watch, the Android phones, iPhones, etc., where we suddenly put the power into the hands of the customer, which is, at the end of the day, the majority of what drives adoption. If we suddenly have mass market that wants this, then adoption is definitely going to happen. And then I think we took the learnings from that, and we took the learnings from the old M2M version and tried to simplify as much as we could towards a proper IoT implementation of that eSIM IoT that has become the SGP32 implementation. So again, it's sort of an evolution and based upon learnings that we've had from previous standards that is really setting the scenes and trying to remove all the not failures, but you can say the challenges that we were meeting with earlier technologies, and again specifically and purposely designed for hardware deployed without a human person behind it to control it.
When you can point to some of those like biggest challenges that you were seeing and that what we've heard from customers over the years too, like what were those challenges around those SIMs that just wasn't possible before to solve?
I think it's both the adoption. Again, the very first version required adoption and investment from the whole operator landscape. And I think we've, not to sort of steer the conversation away from eSIM IoT, but we've seen to some extent the same for new radio access technologies such as NB-IoT and LTM, where that has gotten some acceleration and adoption. We're seeing more and more of it, but it's very slow pace because it's a massive investment from the operators. It's the chicken and egg. Do we invest before the market is there and such? And then again, technical complications. The operator needed to do technical integrations to everyone who wanted to be in this ecosystem. eSIM IoT has flipped that around, saying, okay, we don't put the burden and the investment necessarily onto a limited amount of operators, but we put the investment into it from a customer perspective. So again, if you want to make this investment as an individual customer, you can do so. And again, we've seen all the barriers and the challenges within this ecosystem and where eSIM IoT addresses this. Hence, there is a big mass market of customers, OEMs, others that really want to adopt it and hence are also willing to make that investment. The power dynamics has shifted, which is very positive, I think, in this industry, that again, it's being driven by proper demand.
Yeah, and there's been a shift over the years too, right? Where this earlier versions of SIMs that came out in the early 2000s, where it was so focused on, or not focused, but limited by the vendors had full control of what's possible for the flexibility or the choice of connectivity. Moving to consumer, right, where then it becomes more of that end user can finally choose which provider that you want to use. I remember back in the early 2010s when you had to buy a separate iPhone if you wanted to use Verizon or AT&T or whatever it may be, and we've come so far from that where you have an app just to choose and change your world for it. So it's really, really interesting that it's just the next step of it, and it's just continuing to give more and more control and agency to that end person, to the company that's actually not managing the tens of devices, right, or the couple iPhones they might have, but millions.
Exactly. And it's always been a bit of a disease in our industry, and I think I can speak on behalf of it because we're a very big part of it. But there has been this hesitation from maybe what I would call sort of the very few, you can say, again, if it's the operators or if it's a different part of the ecosystem where we really wanted to try and lock customers in to keep them. And I think that's one of the things that we've been very much against in Onomondo from the very beginning, in that to have proper acceleration and adoption in a mass market, we need to change that behavior. We need to provide tools and innovation that really fits the purposes, and then acceleration and adoptions, etc., will come, which will benefit the greater good. So there will be more for the likes of Onomondo and for the other operators to serve. And exactly, this is sort of putting the power into the hands of the ones actually using it and having a tool that really fulfills the needs of those. And then it's going to be adopted.
Yeah. I think I remember back when I joined Onomondo and some of our first meetings that we had, one of the things that you mentioned, and when I learned about this industry very quickly, you're smiling, but I think it's a funny thing where there's always a new standard in telco. There's always a new standard. It's an extra port. It's an extra technology that this is going to be the one. And I think that it's part of the reason that we wanted to have this conversation, right? Because SGP32, it's going to be here for a while. People are making decisions now that's going to be part of their business for a decade or more to come. So it's so important to go into the details around this so people understand it from the very beginning rather than making a decision now and years down the road of like, oh, okay, I wasn't fully aware of that part of this, and just kind of exposing as much as we can around it. Yes, so let's take a step back because SGP32, eSIM IoT, SMTP+, I think the telco industry, they love an acronym. I think it's one of the things,
Very much so.
I know when we talk about an eSIM, what do we actually mean when we say eSIM? And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of education that we always have going on in the market. So this new standard, eSIM IoT, SGP32, can you walk through high level, what is this actually? How does this actually work, the different components of it?
I can definitely try, but yeah, I would definitely agree. I think, again, we have a tendency to make things amazingly complicated in our industry. But first and foremost, again, eSIM IoT is an ecosystem. I think that's the first thing to have in mind. There's not a eSIM IoT product. It consists of mainly three elements, but it's an ecosystem of different vendors and providers and customers. There's how we as operators, we do it in Onomondo and other operator does it as well. Instead of selling physical SIM cards, you can say eSIM IoT is about sort of making that much more and easier to switch between. So what we sell is eSIM profiles. Or we do that together with, of course, physical SIMs if that's the need our customer want. But for eSIM IoT, we sell eSIM profiles as a connectivity provider or as an operator. Technically, we do that through a service called an SMTP+. Acronyms are very technical, but the SMTP+ is something the operator is having. We have it as Onomondo, other operator has it as well, and that's where we have our eSIM profiles for customers to be able to download and use. Then we still have the physical SIMs. eSIM IoT requires and mandate a physical SIM. That might be a plastic SIM or an embedded SIM or another form factor. That's what you put on your device that then have eSIM IoT capabilities. And on that device, you're able to download profiles from the operators, from the SMTP+, but you're also capable of communicating back to a platform to get instructions on which profiles to download or which profiles to use, etc. But that's on the physical SIM sides, and there are technologies within that SIM that supports eSIM IoT. That is what you go out and purchase, again, as an OEM or a customer, to put on your device. And then you have the platform that is hosted on the internet. It's called the eIM. And that's the platform where you can then manage your fleet of SIMs and which profiles to download, which profiles to swap to, etc. And on this platform, you have sort of the control over which connectivity provider you will use where and how and such. So there's sort of three pieces, again, to eSIM IoT and to the ecosystem. There's the operators that have eSIM profiles on the SMTP+. There's the eSIM IoT enabled SIM cards, physical SIM cards that you need to put on your device. And then there's the eIM platform where you manage all of this.
Yeah. And I guess the idea behind this too is that you don't need to necessarily get all of it from one place either. I think that's to be able to swap things around is actually build the solution that makes the most sense for you. And that's one of the reasons why there being no lock-in and this kind of flexibility is so important for this to actually succeed, both as a technology, but also for that end customer. So many different IoT use cases, right? And so many different business scenarios that they may be in. They need that flexibility of who they're going to buy the SIM from, who they're going to use the platform from.
Yes. I think that is exactly the thing to be aware of, that these three pieces, all of them needs to be interchangeable at any point of time. You need to be able to choose whatever operator or connectivity provider you want to use. you need to be able to choose whoever SIM vendor you want to work with at any point of time. And you need to be able to choose whoever EIM provider that you want to work with and change that at any point of time. So all three elements needs to be changeable at any point of time. That's the flexibility eSIM IoT promises if implemented according to standards that there is.
Can you talk a little bit about, like, in your dreams, right? When you think about IoT at night, which I'm sure you dream about it, but I'm thinking about when you see where this actually goes in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as this actually becomes an interchangeable ecosystem. What do you imagine actually comes from that? What does that actually mean for the IoT use cases that people are thinking of today? Like, how does this actually change how they build?
I think first and foremost, it will be a big part of just acceleration in our industry. Not initially just by new use cases. I don't think that's the biggest promise of eSIM IoT. But it's the fact that, okay, suddenly you can do IoT without needing to make choices that lock you in for the rest of the lifetime of that business case. Because I think that will unlock a lot of decisions that before were maybe or no, suddenly becomes yes decisions, and you're actually going to see companies doing much more of this. That's the biggest promise that I see that eSIM IoT can do. And then I think going forward, when it becomes much more of a standard, and this is how the industry works, that we're going to have these market needs. Again, if it's deploying in Brazil, that wasn't as easy before, that you can unlock new markets much easier. So doing hardware as a company, not necessarily selling it, but it's part of your solution, either for you to gather insights and or to sell that piece of hardware, suddenly the world becomes smaller because you can unlock new markets much easier. I think those are the two big things we're going to see. So decisions is going to be much easier, and you as a company, in whatever business you are, new markets will unfold much easier than they were before.
That makes sense, and I think that's something where you've mentioned it over the years too, and I think it's something that we talk a lot about internally, is about how we can make, one could say, IoT connectivity invisible in some way. And I think that comes from that I hate the word seamlessness of it, right? But it just becomes frictionless, is maybe the same way to say the same thing, or a different way to say the same thing. But and that comes from something we've talked quite a bit about around connectivity becoming infrastructure, and not something that's just I need a SIM card just to connect, but there's more to it than that. Can you put a couple words around that?
There is exactly much more to it. Connecting a product is not just about choosing a connectivity provider. It's a completely new exercise for one as a company or a user of it. It's again remotely distributed devices across the globe or in a country, managing data, they performing well, etc. All of that. That is not just buying a SIM that you plug into your phone or a device. That works for the smartphone and stuff like that. If something goes wrong, you reboot your phone and then it works again. It's a completely different thing when you do IoT. And so IoT is not just about choosing a connectivity provider, it is exactly infrastructure that you need to apply onto your whole solution. It's a bit like deploying, you can say, something in the cloud in your SaaS environment. You're choosing your cloud vendor and you're choosing all the managed services you want, or you build stuff proprietary, etc. There's a lot more to it than just, you can say, buying a server. Similar to IoT, it's not just buying a SIM card and connectivity, it's actually the infrastructure and the ecosystem around connecting that product, everything from the modem to the eSIM IoT and capabilities you have on your device to your connectivity provider to the insights that you're getting for remotely operating your fleet, etc., etc.
And can you talk a little bit more about, like, what does that look like in practice? So someone could be out there and they're looking for their EIM, they're looking for that platform to be able to manage this. They know that they need the SGP32 SIMs, they need their SMTP Plus and everything to get those profiles ready to take advantage of this. But that's not guaranteed they're going to have that flexibility. So what are the things that people actually need to think about or look out for?
You can say very specifically, it is making sure that what can sound a bit technical, that you can say that the EIM is reconfigurable. So on your SIMs, you can work with an EIM. And also that your eSIM IoT platform and ecosystem can work with, again, very technically, any SMTP Plus which is the thing that operators, where they host their eSIM profiles. But what it means, if suddenly you have a vendor login in any of these scenarios, it might be that, okay, you started out, you've chosen an eSIM IoT vendor, you got access to 3 operators and you can serve your needs, but then suddenly you want to go to Brazil. But in this closed ecosystem, there isn't a connectivity provider that can serve Brazil for you, and you might end up not being able to just freely choose it on your own, but you need to go through, you can say, the vendor you've chosen, and they might not have an interest, the buy-in or the capabilities to actually make that happen. Or it might also be that from, not from a connectivity point of view, but again, from an eSIM IoT platform point of view, you have a platform where you manage your SIMs and your connectivity provider agreements and your deployment of your fleets. But you want to change your SIM vendor, or there's functionality in this platform where you've seen other things in the market coming up, innovation, and you want to change to that because it serves your need at that point in time. And you don't have the flexibility to do so. Or you suddenly need to have your legacy fleet here, and then you have a new fleet over here, which is the scenario that we have a bit today, where you might have a few 100,000 devices over here with one operator, and now you've chosen a new one where all your new devices are going to be deployed with, but you still have that legacy fleet. And I think we all know from an operational point of view that is not scalable, that is not commercially viable or operational viable to have that. So one very much needs to be aware of that in the eSIM IoT ecosystem and the vendors that one is working with, that there is the flexibility both on the eSIM profiles or the connectivity providers, both on the SIMs and also on the EIM or the platform, that everything is interchangeable at any point of time.
Definitely. And I think that's the way that this actually becomes scalable. Other way, it's a new standard with a bunch of different implementations of it, and then
or we're going to see small islands of ecosystems, and which one to tap into.
Yes, yeah, no, that's and I think that when it comes to like who's actually benefiting from this lock-in, right, or who's benefiting from this technology, it starts to become a lock-in again, is what it sounds like, which is exactly what it's built to completely eliminate. Yeah,
exactly. Again, it simply doesn't fulfill the whole promise of it, and the ones that's going to be hurt by it is the users or the customers of this.
Is this fear-mongering, or is this something that we're actually seeing also something that's implemented today? When we think about, we're in 2026 right now, there are EIM platforms that are coming out. Is this something that we're actually seeing around there still being some risk of lock-in with that, or what are you saying?
Unfortunately, yes, we're already seeing it now, and that's also back to why we as Onomondo are venturing into this, is really to try to change that. But unfortunately right now, I think stats from DSMA has shown that 5 out of 8 current as of today eSIM IoT vendors unfortunately has chosen to not provide the freedom to change things down the road, which means more than half is already implemented wrongly and not to the promise of eSIM IoT. What we've also seen is that one needs to have in mind that eSIM IoT is still very, very new. The standards were finalized last year in 2025. It's only up until today that we're actually seeing what we would refer to as DSMA certified.
Let's say it's a business that's going to be deploying tens of thousands of trackers out there. It could be container tracking, metering, whatever it actually may be. And they're deploying devices out there that is using this technology, but it's with a non-configurable EIM solution as their backend. What does that actually mean for them when something goes wrong, when something needs to change? What's like the consequences of not having this fully open solution?
If the EIM is not reconfigurable, you're sort of tied into, you can say, that part of your deployment. If you deployed 1,000 SIMs or 1 million that is tied to this EIM, they will be tied to this one forever, for their lifetime.
For outside of the technology behind it, the company's tied to that. What does that actually mean for the company?
Well, it means that you have a commercial relationship to that EIM vendor forever, or as long as that deployed fleet at least is alive. That might be for the next 3, 5, 7 years, or however long the lifespan is for those devices. So you have a commercial relationship with that, and again, the management, the reason for having an EIM is of course also to manage your devices and their connectivity profiles on those, and that needs to happen through that EIM throughout, again, the lifetime of those devices.
And so that's a really expensive wedding and an even more expensive divorce.
Yes.
Okay. Makes sense a little bit. It's good to be aware of that when we're actually making these decisions, right? From here, we're talking about lock-in quite a bit, and one of the things that Onomondo has had as part of our DNA from the very beginning is around the freedom to leave. Can you talk a little bit around that, of kind of eliminating the lock-ins for devices, and what does freedom to leave actually mean to you, for the industry, and for our customers?
I think freedom to leave for us has always been around. We didn't want to lock customer in with a year-long contract and grow based upon necessarily, you can say, unhappy customers, but we had the revenue because we had locked them in from the very beginning. We really wanted to serve customers because they were happy to be with Onomondo, because we had the best quality, we had the best tools, etc., all of that. So it has been very close to heart, freedom to leave, from the very beginning. But also from the sheer fact that we truly believe in unlocking this and again allow customers to truly make their choices. It's also going to be easier for the customers to make a choice of doing IoT. Where I think we've seen a lot in the industry where people are hesitant to do so because of the fear of making the wrong choices. If we could suddenly remove that fear and saying, okay, well, the choices you make today, 3 months or 3 years from now, you can change those, then it suddenly becomes a much different company risk to actually venture into doing IoT. And hence, we're going to see acceleration of IoT-enabled devices and deployments, and all of that will, again, hopefully benefit everyone in this ecosystem. And eSIM IoT really have the promise to do so. One of the things that we had with freedom to leave in Onomondo is it wasn't necessarily sort of an industry-wide accepted way of doing things. Technically, it's possible to change your operator, and it has been for the last 20 years or 20 plus years. But it was on the consent of, you can say, the existing operator. So we as Onomondo, we've done it, but unfortunately, we haven't seen the rest of the industry follow that. Luckily now we have a standard eSIM IoT that doesn't need, you can say, the consent of the existing operator, but it's actually the power of the user or the customer to choose whatever is needed, and so that it's a industry-wide accepted freedom to leave clause that we're seeing, or technology that we're seeing being implemented here.
And is that a guarantee that with
Unfortunately, no.
Okay.
Unfortunately, no, it's not a guarantee, and I think unfortunately that's also is as I mentioned, the disease of telecom as a whole. Is unfortunately we're not necessarily seeing this being implemented to the promise of what it needed to fulfill. This is also one of the reasons why we are venturing into it as Onomondo. Otherwise, we would probably not touch it. We would actually leave it to other vendors who's been more experienced in that market. But unfortunately, we've seen that there are ways of implementing this where you can still once again create these closed ecosystems and vendor logins. And unfortunately, that can happen both, you can say, towards the connectivity as such. So you might end up as a customer and only be able to choose between a handful of operators, because that's the closed ecosystem and the vendor login that was put in there by how eSIM IoT was implemented in the solution of yours. And or it might also be, and that's actually back to where we need to detach eSIM IoT from connectivity as a whole. It might be that you have the freedom to choose amongst the majority of all connectivity providers, but you're locked into your eSIM IoT provider, whether that being the SIMs or the eIM, the platform to remotely control this, then suddenly you're stuck with that relationship. Luckily, again, according to specification, technical specification, if implemented correctly, there's the freedom to choose whatever connectivity provider you want, to work with any SIM vendor you want, and also to change the eIM or the platform that you have at any point of time to whoever you see fit. And I think that's important to be aware of. So again, you don't take decisions today that then you figure out 3 years from now that, oh, suddenly there was this, that then suddenly prohibit or make it a challenge for you to then change your choices. And that's part of what we also really want to educate and inform about, what people should be aware of when venturing in and make a relationship with an eSIM IoT vendor.
We're talking about what it means for when eSIM IoT truly becomes more flexible and more limitless for what it actually means for the customer. What does that actually mean that the industry needs to do in order to make that possible? When I say the industry, the MNOs, MVNOs, the people that are developing EIMs, etc. What is their responsibility to make sure that this is as successful as possible for the people that are actually deploying the devices out there?
You can say, unfortunately, part of the standards for eSIM IoT, making, you can say, all the elements interchangeable is not something that you are mandated or required to do to fulfill eSIM IoT and the standards following that. Those specific requirements are unfortunately optional in the specifications. So you might choose still fulfill eSIM IoT and it might be an EIM vendor or a SIM vendor. You might have eSIM IoT DSMA certified SIMs or a platform, but it might not be that you've implemented very technically making the EIM reconfigurable, because it's a choice that you can take on not implementing that and still fulfill the need defined by DSMA. But by not implementing that, you're also then providing the vendor login and saying, okay, for the customers using your product, they cannot change, if it's the making the EIM reconfigurable, they cannot change the EIM platform that is tied with these SIMs at any point of time. So unfortunately, you can say to make sure that eSIM IoT and the whole ecosystem becomes with no vendor login and all the flexibility that eSIM IoT promises, the vendors in the ecosystem needs to choose optional requirements to fulfill that. And again, back to, unfortunately, in our industry, we're seeing some not doing that, which will, at the end of the day, create smaller closed ecosystems, which is by no means the benefit of the customers and the users of it. That will then, again, probably prohibit accelerations and adoptions and all of that. So there is one thing is that we have our responsibilities as vendors in this ecosystem to fulfill the promise of eSIM IoT and implement all the optional features that is required to provide a truly no vendor lock-in ecosystem. We also need the market, the users, the customers to demand this from the vendors, and of course that's education and being aware and known that one should ask for this. So again, you can say we have the capabilities to fulfill that, but I think for this to truly sort of being implemented, we also need the market to ask for it specifically. Otherwise, unfortunately, we're probably going to end up in again, walled gardens and closed ecosystems and small island of implementations that is for no benefit of anyone.
Is there any benefit to the EIM not being configurable?
No.
Okay. We'll move on from that then. For the companies that are actually out there today, in the next year or two, as this becomes more and more available, what are the types of questions they should be asking, or what should they be actually looking for? Because I think there's part of this where, I mean, does this even make sense for every single type of device? So I think that's one part of it. Another part of it would be when they do need when they realize it's for their use case, what should they be asking?
Yeah. I think what they should be asking is back to also what is within this ecosystem of eSIM IoT, back to, you can say, the operators, the SIM vendors, and the EIM platform. And what they need to make sure and to ask is, of course, is all of them, all the elements changeable at whatever point in time. Again, that you can choose whatever connectivity provider you want. You can choose whatever SIM vendor you want, and you can change the EIM when you want. So it's those three pieces that needs to be interchangeable at whatever point in time. I think that's the best thing to be aware of. And then, of course, also this ecosystem can exist because it's DSMA certified. So the solution that you're buying and the ecosystem that you're buying into needs to work within a DSMA certified ecosystem. Because again, back to, as we've seen, there might be, you can say, eSIM IoT compatible deployments which is not DSMA certified, so they will become a small closed island on their own. So again, the promise is to be able to work with anyone.
And if there was one thing that you could just say to anybody that's listening to this right now, where if they just wanted to copy paste something to put into an email to send to their whoever they're negotiating with right now, what's that one question they should be asking to make sure that they're on the right side of this?
Are your eSIM IoT solution DSMA certified, and do you fulfill the promise of no vendor login in any piece of the chain?
Copy paste. Yes.
Copy paste.
All right. I think just to wrap things up, I can see that this topic is something that is something you care a lot about. We've been working in the industry for a long time, or you much longer than me, but working in the industry for quite some time, and you've seen how different standards can have a negative impact and how there's a lot of promises that can come from just making things a bit more accessible for customers. What's the part of this that just kind of grinds your gears right now, and the part of this that kind of just makes you nervous but also hopeful at the same time?
I'm utterly excited about eSIM IoT because back to also sort of the freedom to leave thing that we've had with Onomondo since the very day that we founded this company is that we truly believe in giving the power to the customers and the users is going to drive acceleration, which is good for everyone. Also good for us as a business. It's good for everyone. Freedom to leave and has unfortunately not been accepted by the broader industry as a whole up until now. And I think eSIM IoT is the first sort of industry-wide, for IoT, industry-wide standard that can fulfill that promise. That's exciting. It's exciting to see that, okay, we all agree on this is the way to go. And at the end of the day, the users and the customers can actually have the capabilities to fully on their own choose whatever is best for them. Full stop. I think that is exciting. What I really, really dislike is how we are then seeing this traditional telecom industry trying to still circumvent this and to not fulfill the promise of that, which I think at the end of the day is going to hurt everyone. We're going to see less acceleration. We're going to see less adoption. We're going to see less IoT-enabled projects. That is not good for anyone. So I'm utterly excited about it. I really hate the way that we're, as an industry as a whole, is trying to attack this, which is also, I think, why we're still, as of today, seeing that telecom is not tech, still as of 2026. It's its own thing, with all the complications that comes with this. And I think we really sort of need to unfuck telecom. And I think we have an opportunity to do so with the standard.
Enough said. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks, Henrik, for this talk. I hope that this was enlightening. I know it was for me, and it's good to hear this over and over again about like the importance of actually getting this right. And we're still in the early days of this technology, and it's so important that we get it right from the get-go. So thanks everybody also for watching this too. And if you have any questions about eSIM IoT more in depth, I know Henrik would love to get on a call with you and talk to you a little bit more about it too, because he knows this like the back of his hand. So we welcome more conversations about this, and also want to hear your thoughts of what are your hopes and what are the things that you're still trying to figure out around this technology as it continues to get implemented into real life. So thanks, and yeah, thanks again, Henrik.
Thank you.